How to hip hinge correctly to deadlift safely. Unleash your power, achieve your potential. I'm John Calarco, Holistic Health and Performance Coach. If you don't have the movement skill to perform the hip hinge movement pattern properly, or if you have an excessively tilted forward pelvis, in this position we call that an anterior pelvic tilt, and that's causing excessive overarching of the lower spine, then you have to master the hip hinge movement pattern because it's going to help you gain the movement skill and control to do the hip hinge properly, which is not only going to allow you to deadlift safely, but just deadlift and pick things up properly as you go through everyday life. It's also going to allow you to begin to correct your posture in the lower spine and in the pelvis and help us get to more of a neutral pelvis and neutral spine position. And of course, you're going to start to develop some fundamental levels of stability and strength as we move and challenge holding into those positions as well. So it's going to help us prevent injury in the lower back and the hips. Now, the hip hinge, as I mentioned, is one of the most fundamental human movement patterns, but it's the most fundamental human movement pattern for the lower body. Okay, the other lower body movement patterns are the squat and the lunge, okay? So when we do a squat, we want to have the skill to hip hinge and drive the hips back first on that initial descent, okay? And then we're coming down and flexing the knees fully. So the hip hinge pattern, which if you don't know, is just taking the hips straight back to the wall behind us with a slight knee bend, maintaining a neutral spine, as you can see, is the foundation for the squat, okay? It allows us to recruit the glutes and the hamstrings properly in the squat pattern. And then for the lunge pattern, the same rules apply. When we drive forward and we step into that position, not only are we going to be just knee and quad dominant if we have good strength and the ability to hip hinge properly in the lunge, and depending on what type of lunge we perform, if you're performing more of a true lunge where you're keeping an upright posture and the knees driving forward, just the strength of the hamstrings and the glutes is going to help support that. So that's where it will be beneficial. But if you're performing a lunge that's a little more sport specific and maybe you're getting into a position where you're more in this single leg strength and movement kind of athletic position, then that's going to load the glutes and hamstrings more. So being able to hip hinge properly will allow you to achieve that position better. Okay? Now, previously on the channel, I showed you quite a few mobility and stability exercises that will allow you to perform the hip hinge a lot easier. Okay? So like the band assisted hamstring stretch, the leg lowering exercise, the half kneeling hamstring, hip flexor stretch, the half kneeling Pallof press, okay? All these exercises to improve our fundamental hip mobility and stability, which will really allow you to achieve your full range of motion in the hip hinge. So if you haven't watched those videos yet, I'd highly recommend that after you learn this one, that you go back and you watch those, especially if you try this one and you're kind of having a hard time, you're not really getting into a full range of motion in your hips, maybe you're short, you feel on your range of motion. Those exercises will really help make you perform this exercise just easier. All right, now the muscles that we're going to be working, I kind of spoke to them already. First, we're going to be stabilizing through the spine as we set ourselves, and we're going to be stabilizing through the abdominals and the lower back muscles. Then we're going to be using the hip flexors here on the front side of the body to flex us back into hip flexion. Then we'll be loading into the glutes and the hamstrings while they're in a stretched position, which is another key benefit of this exercise. And then of course, we'll be using those glutes and hamstrings to extend the hips and bring us back up into that start position, okay? So there's a couple of ways that we can perform the hip hinge patterning exercise, okay? Now, the best way to perform it is with a dowel, okay, that I'm going to show you how to do in a second, but I'm going to show you a couple of other ways after I show you with the dowel that you can do this without the dowel, and sometimes it's necessary because, as you'll see, the dowel is going to put our our shoulders in a very stretched position and requires some significant mobility. So again, another previous video that I showed you how to do the T-spine rotation and reach is another great one to do before you start trying to do this exercise with the dowel, because it will allow you to achieve the position of the upper body a lot easier. All right, so I'm going to show you the dowel hip hinge first with the mini band, and then I'll show you how to do the other variations without the dowel. So let's get started on this one. To take the mini band on, we're just going to bring it, of course, above the feet, and we're going to actually want to place it above the knees on this one. So I'm going to set it up, okay, right above my knees here. Try to flatten this thing out if I can. All right, so I'm set above the knees with my mini band. Then I'm going to take the dowel and I'm going to place it along my spine, And first things first, we want to make sure the hands are in the right position. This is something that a lot of people miss when they do this dowel hip hinge, okay? The top hand, we want to be in line with the curve of the neck, all right? So we don't want it up here, we want it in this position. And then especially the lower hand is even more important. We want it in the curve here of the lower back, the natural curve of the lower spine. We don't want it down here. We're not, using our strength to just push the dowel on us. We're actually just setting the hands to help hold us accountable to keep in the neutral spine. So I'm not really, using a lot of my strength to keep the dowel on me in this exercise, all right? Then, once you have the hand positions correct in the right spots on the spine, we're gonna take the dowel and make sure it's in contact with the back of the head, the upper back, okay, right in the middle of the upper back, and then the sacrum, okay, which is right here above the glutes, okay, that bone just at the very bottom of your lower back, below your lower spine. Okay, so once you feel those contact points are in position, we want to make sure the shoulders are set properly. So if I give you this frontal view, you're going to see that I have my top arm opened up. Okay, so I'm not here in this position. That's going to lead to more flexion of the spine. So really extend, okay, and we're actually externally rotating and flexing the upper arm here. And then for this back arm, we're in internal rotation and extension. So yeah, you will feel a stretch here in the front of the chest and the shoulder a little bit. So make sure that that shoulder is back and down. We don't want to be in this excessively rounded posture, okay? So once we get set, okay, the dowel's in position, our hands are in position, and we're in contact. Let's take the feet about hip width apart, okay? Maybe slightly wider depending on what feels most comfortable for you. Toes are essentially pointed straight forward. They could be slightly turned out for you if that's most comfortable when you get back into full hip flexion in the back position here. All right, and then we're gonna press those toes into the ground. Once we get set up, we're ready to perform it. The setup is the hardest part. The execution of the exercise is simple, not easy, but simple. All right, so we're gonna inhale, make sure that we have our setup position, then we're gonna inhale. We're gonna focus on driving our hips straight back, hinging them straight back to the wall behind us. Okay, as we inhale, and making sure that that band does not pull our knees in. All right, so I'm actively preventing the band from pulling my knees in. I'm pressing my toes into the ground. And then as you can see, I just have a slight bend in my knees. Okay, that's all we want here so we can really load up that stretch in the glutes and the hamstrings. Okay, and then we're standing tall at the top, squeezing the glutes. I'll show you one more. Inhale, drive those hips straight back to the wall behind you. Okay, my hands are very light here. Drive out, squeeze the glutes, stand nice and tall. Okay, so that is the dowel hip hinge. Again, my hands are very light in that position. I'm not forcing the dowel onto my back. It's simply there in a light position with my hands in the proper spots so that it can hold me accountable to maintaining that perfect neutral spine. Okay, now, in terms of where you should feel the exercise, I really mentioned it already. You should feel a great stretch in the glutes and the hamstrings in the back position. Okay, you should feel the core muscles stabilizing as you work to maintain the neutral position and not lose your neutral position. And then you should feel the glutes and hamstrings working a bit as you hold the back position and drive out. Now the mini band is going to get us some extra work in the lateral glute muscles, the glute medius, as well as increasing the activation through the glute max muscle, okay? So whenever we're externally rotating like this with the band, okay, band is trying to pull us in, we're externally rotating and abducting. That's gonna fire up the glutes more because the glutes are the main external rotator of the hip, okay? And the main abductor of our hip is our gluteus medius, which is this muscle right here on the side of the glute. All right, so that's the benefit of using the mini band as well as just really helping you maintain that perfect alignment of the knees staying in line with the middle toes. We don't want those knees caving in at any point. All right, so those are some mistakes to watch out for. Now, the biggest mistakes to watch out for are, of course, not losing our position with the dowel, okay? So we don't want to overflex the spine, right? That means we're going to lose the lower contact point on the sacrum, so we don't want that to happen. And then we also don't want to overextend the spine, okay? So make sure as you go through that you're not arching the upper back excessively. If you can see that there, you'll see how my upper back is no longer in contact with the dowel, okay? So the dowel becomes a great self-limiting tool for us here to really make sure we're maintaining that perfect neutral spine position throughout the entirety of the exercise. Another mistake, that's a big one here we don't want to make, is squatting, okay? We don't want to get an excessive bend in the knees. So don't turn this into a squat and start dropping down and flexing the knees a lot, okay? Just keep that slight knee bend, and let's keep it that true hip hinge, just a slight knee bend. Think of it as like a good athletic knee bend. Maybe it's about 20 degrees of knee bend, okay, that we're going through there as we get in that back position. All right, one more thing in that back position. Make sure that you don't overhinge, right? We don't want to get so far back that the toes start coming up off the ground like that, all right? Keep those toes, as I mentioned earlier, pressed into the ground. That's not only gonna help stabilize the foot, but it's just gonna keep you in the right balanced position here so we don't overhinge, okay? And then lastly, we just wanna make sure that we don't rotate the hips at all. So sometimes doing this exercise, it's really helpful to have a wall directly behind you so that you're not excessively, rotating your hips to one leg or the other. So again, we want to go straight back. If you do have a wall that you can place behind you, then you'd have to obviously take your dowel up quite a bit higher so it doesn't hit the wall as you hinge. But we could use that wall as a great training tool and cueing tool to make sure that you are moving straight back and not rotating excessively side to side. Okay, so those are the common mistakes that we want to avoid in the hip hinge. Now, for those other variations, if you don't have a dowel handy, if you have a mini band, great, you can still use it without. If you don't have a mini band, just don't worry about the mini band. Just focus on, as I mentioned, making sure that the knees stay in line with the middle toes as you do the exercise. So I'll give you that demonstration really quick, okay? If I don't have the mini band, let's say I don't have it, because this is really important, okay? Again, the mini band is gonna, again, be another great coaching tool to force you into the right positions and encourage the right positions so you don't have to think so much in this exercise. There's so much going on in this full body integrated movement pattern that we want to work on it and train it in ways that we don't have to think so much about all the things going on. That's why the mini band and the dowel is such great tools to use in this exercise. But again, if you don't have the dowel, okay, if you don't have the mini band, then what we're going to work on is just a position where we can take our hands, one onto the front of the lower spine and one onto the back of the lower spine, okay? This is still gonna give us great accountability on maintaining the neutral spine. So if you're not sure where your neutral is now because you don't have dowel contact points to guide you, then what you can do here is just like I taught you in the bird dog exercise, okay? Extend the spine as much as you can and then come off about 2 inches and you should be ready for a punch in the stomach. That's just about the spot where you know that you're in the neutral spine, okay? So give yourself a couple taps. That's a great way to set yourself, all right, and get to that neutral spine like someone's gonna punch you in the stomach. Now we're just gonna tuck the chin back, maintain that long spine position, and same cues apply. We're gonna drive the hips straight back to the wall behind us as we inhale. Okay, hold 2 seconds. Drive out, squeeze the glutes at the top, nice and tall, legs are straight as well, all right? Toes are still pressing into the ground. And then, to make sure the knees aren't caving in, you're just gonna focus on driving them out, okay? You're gonna get some external rotation going, okay? Feel that little bit of rotation happening like you're driving the knees out to the walls, all right, to the sides of you, but don't let that big toe come up. That's the trick when we wanna externally rotate the hips as much as we need to or as much as we should and not overdo it, right? We don't want to get to the side of the feet like that. The trick is to keep the big toes pressed down and rotate out as much as you can without letting that big toe come up, all right? That's a great way to make sure that we're getting that external rotation that the band forces without having the band. I'll give you one more way to do it if doing this position is still too much stretch for your shoulder. I've worked with many clients that still going into this internally rotated extended position is still a little too much stretch on the shoulders, and there's other mobility drills that I'll show you in the future that can address that if you're having that problem. But if you are having that problem now, just for the sake of correcting it and getting rid of it, we'll take the hands right into the hip crease. This is another great variation to master this hip hinge. Okay, same thing, feet hip width apart, press those toes into the ground, set that neutral spine, okay, chin is tucked back, same way I just showed you here. Go into the full arch position, come off about 2 inches, ready for that punch in the stomach. Now your body is set. We're gonna take the hands right into the crease of the hip. Same thing, inhale, and use those hands, actively drive them back against you. Okay, come to that back position. Stand it back up, squeezing the glutes coming through. Okay, I'll show you one more on this one. I'll give you the front view so you can see my knees here. I'm externally rotating, pressing my toes. Exhaling as you come back to the top position, okay? The other cue that I like about this one is really pressing the hands back into you. That's gonna get those lats activated a bit more, which is gonna help stabilize the spine more and just help you activate those muscles more and carry over well to your strength exercises, okay? So that's how we perform the hip hinge movement pattern, and quite a few variations there that you can use to find the best one for you based on the equipment you have. And maybe maybe you're in a gym somewhere, you don't have dowels or whatever to use, then you can just do it on the fly. So this is something you can practice anywhere, anytime, to really master that movement pattern. Now, in terms of the sets and reps that you should do on this exercise, we want to think about a little more repetitions because this is really skill training. You're definitely going to get some strength work, especially if you got the mini band on. We're going to be working on some abduction and external rotation in the hips. If you're holding that back position, which I recommend for at least 2-3 seconds, you're going to feel some work doing 10-15 reps, and that's exactly about how much we want to do. So 2 to 3 sets of about 10 to 15 reps. That's generally where we want to be when we're working on movement skill and working on the stabilizing muscles of the body that help us control movement, okay? So think 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 15 reps. This is something you can do every day, especially in the beginning. If you're a beginner and you're just learning this pattern and how to do it properly, you can do it every day to practice it. You can't really do too much of it. Obviously, if you're more advanced, then this is something that you don't have to do every day. If it's something that you've already mastered, then we would think about just using it in our warm-up, maybe at the end of our warm-up to pattern our hip hinge before we're gonna do some deadlifting, before we're gonna load up some RDLs. And again, it can be used in a warm-up. It can be something that you honestly don't even really do much anymore if you're really that advanced and you know how to hip hinge, but I still recommend it after your mobility. So whether you're a beginner or you're more advanced, after your mobility work is a great time. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, all those exercises that I've shown you previously on the channel to open up your hip mobility and upper body mobility are great to start your workout with. Then moving into a skill-based practice like this is great. It's gonna get you some activation, gonna get you some movement skill training for your deadlifts, for your RDLs, so that you can perform them optimally as you train. Okay, so that is the hip hinge. I hope that was helpful for you. If it was, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like here and make sure you subscribe. As you can see, this is a series of videos that I'm taking you through of how to build the fundamental human movement patterns, especially the hip hinge. We're gonna go from those mobility exercises I talked about to this one, and then we're gonna go into teaching you how to perform the RDLs and deadlifts safely and properly. So make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for that. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on them. And hey, drop any comments below in the comment section. If you have any questions about this exercise, I'll be happy to answer them for you. Unleash your power, achieve your potential.